You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 435 of the podcast. And in this one, I chat with Alex, who has kindly agreed to share his OCD story with us. We discuss harm-themed OCD, hit-and-run-themed OCD, reassurance seeking, finding a therapist that could help with OCD, exposure and response prevention therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, judgements, and much, much more. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you so much to Alex for sharing his story. I deeply appreciate it. And thank you to you guys for listening. As always, it means a lot. Without further ado, here is Alex. Welcome to the podcast, Alex.
Thanks, Stuart.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. So I'd love to hear your OCD story, and you can share that now as little or as much detail as you want to give.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, I first started having sort of symptoms of OCD back in 2018. So I was probably around 23, 24 years of age, albeit I didn't realize it was potentially OCD at the time. It kind of started after I had a night out with friends. I got probably a little bit too drunk. I sort of had memory blanks, which I filled with what if I assaulted someone or kind of things like that. And I think at the time I just thought, oh, maybe it's just getting a bit of the fear the next day, but that kind of continued for a long period of time before snowballing into other types of obsessions, which sort of carried on for a sort of 2-year period where I sort of struggled with it and still couldn't really grasp what was happening. And naturally, I was doing a lot of compulsions, definitely the wrong way of trying to solve it, until I managed to find the sort of right therapy, I guess, where I started to go on my own recovery journey. So yeah, I had all sorts of types of obsessions. Again, maybe assaulting people, murdering people, doing things that would potentially land me in prison. And again, I remember seeking a lot of reassurance from my family or friends at the time, which again led me even deeper into it. And I think it was really difficult because I'm constantly trying to solve these things, but they were pretty much unsolvable. They were all to do with stuff that's happened in the past rather than the future. So it might be if I was walking down the street, maybe what if I just assaulted that person, and then I would have to immediately check to turn around that I've not done that. Have that momentary sense of ease and the anxiety until something else will tell you that you've done it later down the line. So that was definitely a sort of repeating pattern anyway for a long period of time until I found the right help. This sort of carried on and greatly affected my life probably for that 2-year period in 2018 and 2019, until I met the right therapist. I think I'd been to 4 or 5 therapists at this point who probably didn't diagnose it properly, but I was determined to sort of get help, and I was kind of at a last resort. I think it was in early 2020, and luckily I found a person who said, oh, this is probably OCD, and then we started doing exposure and response prevention therapy, which definitely helped massively at the time and was definitely a sort of glimmer of hope and light at that point. And I could objectively see that I was improving from doing the exposure and response prevention. I think also paired with that, in 2020 when I started seeking the right therapy, it also happened to coincide with the pandemic. I was fortunate enough to go home for a long period of time with my family. Work definitely reduced. The work that I do is very much dependent on having lots of people in a space at once. So the pandemic wasn't exactly conducive towards that. So kind of had half a year almost of a very quiet period. So that really helped therapy at the same time and helped me practice as much as I could to ultimately get better. So that sort of carried on, and I did get increasingly better. But I still think even though I went through the exposure and response prevention, it was more about probably the reactions, and I was still having a lot of sort of judgmental feelings, even though I'd cut out most of the compulsions. And I think mental compulsions were also still a real struggle because they almost felt so automatic, and I would naturally just keep sort of fighting them or trying to be certain that I didn't assault someone or whatever it might be in my head. So that's when I had a bit of a lapse due to that, and I think I started to struggle again back in 2022, and then I got therapy from Johnny Say, who I know has appeared on this podcast a few times. So I think having already done exposure and response prevention, whilst we did a bit of that with Johnny, I think we moved a lot more to the acceptance piece, trying to be a lot more non-judgmental. And I think that side of it really helped me have more of a sort of safe haven for recovery, or certainly long-term recovery. I think absolutely exposure and response prevention was key to starting that process, but I think it's probably really hard to sustain if you don't have that acceptance piece. Well, it was for me anyway. So yeah, that was really helpful, and sort of since then, symptoms haven't been too bad. I think it'll always be an ongoing thing to work on, and I'll always have symptoms of OCD, I'm sure, for the rest of my life. But I think it's just about managing it, and I think part of the reason I wanted to come on and speak to you is that I think no matter how sort of difficult it was, and I could never really appreciate that I'd be in a better position a few years ago, that I just wanted to give other people hope. That although it feels like it's the end of the world and you're not going to recover from this, I think you always can do. And yeah, it was just so challenging at the time. Sorry, sure.
Was to say, no, thank you for sharing. And yeah, you're right on the acceptance piece. And I guess for those listening, like, what do you mean by acceptance of this?
So I think my interpretation was more, it's more just accepting that you're going to have these thoughts, and rather than fighting against them, it's more just, it's just this thought again. I don't need to sort of seek full clarity on this. I can sort of go about my values or my sort of day-to-day things that I actually want to do, and just have these thoughts in the background or almost diffuse from them. And I think that was always the part that I'd struggled with, that I wasn't doing the compulsions as such, but I would still have the urge to continue to compulse. And it was just almost a losing battle after a while. So I think yeah, seeing Johnny definitely helped me view my thoughts from almost felt like more externally, that I was observing them rather than
Mm.
um, actioning things on the back of them.
Yeah. Yeah. So sort of learning to drop the struggle almost of like fighting against it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think when I first had it for the couple of years and not understanding the disorder, that you just naturally, all I've
Mm.
learned in life is to just try and solve a problem, or if you're worried
Mm.
about something and you can solve it, then solve it. And I think it's complete opposite with someone who has OCD, that you have to sort of go against your instincts and think
Yeah.
almost sounds silly, but doing nothing is just the best thing to do,
Yeah.
and to
Yeah.
try and go about your life the best you can. And I can't remember listening to, I
Mm.
think, another podcast, or it might have been someone
Mm.
like Mark Freeman, and he said,
Mm.
like, it doesn't matter like how you get from A to B. It doesn't matter if it's sort of horrible or easy. I think the fact that you get to A to B is just the main thing,
Yeah.
rather than worrying about how you do it.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. Nice. And it's really, I know Johnny really well. We co-run a OCD center together. And so to hear you detail basically ACT and the processes of acceptance commitment therapy really well shows that you and him did some good work together, and you've remembered it, which is really a key point, because I think sometimes we do therapy and we just don't remember what was done in it or the skills we learn or yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, some of his techniques really help that. I think
Yeah.
a few of the key ones for things like naming, just naming how you're feeling and almost sitting with it, not
Mm.
judging those thoughts, because I know it probably still gets talked about a lot, but I think the judgments that you put on yourself and how bad it can sort of make you feel is probably like
Mm.
underestimated. I know that when I was really struggling, my sort of self-esteem was so low that it felt like I was doing the things that my thoughts were telling me, and
Mm.
almost at times reacted like they'd really happened, kind of thing. And yeah, I think you have such shame because of that.
Yeah, yeah. Rather than, as you say earlier, like the diffusion, seeing the thoughts as thoughts, and yeah, not as fact. Um, okay. And okay, so yeah, the noticing and naming. Were there any other skills that really stick out for you, or ones that maybe you still use today?
Yeah, absolutely. There was a sort of process that he ran through called dropping anchor,
Mm.
and that was effectively, it was a little bit to do with sort of diffusion and naming, but it was essentially just almost in a meditation, sitting with those thoughts,
Mm.
bringing yourself back into the present, having a sort of non-judgmental approach. Yeah, sort of looking around the room, naming objects, engaging your senses, bringing yourself back into your body.
Yeah, yeah, nice.
Um, and then there was another one called dipping in and out the stream, which is
Mm.
effectively sort of an exposure in the sense that you'd bring up thoughts that probably made you feel uncomfortable at the time, but um, combination of bringing them up, sitting with those thoughts, and then bringing yourself back into the present again. So,
Yeah,
which seems to work really well.
nice. And say with dipping in and out of the stream, how often would you practice that in therapy? Was it something you did weekly, something you did once, or?
Yeah, at the time it was probably a couple of times weekly, and it was definitely dropping anchor every single day, sometimes twice a day, which took around sort of 10 minutes.
Mm.
And I think you can find some of these recordings on
Yeah,
Johnny's website.
yeah, yeah, and his YouTube channel. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, cool. So would you follow the recordings or would you just do it from memory, do you think?
Yeah, I think it depended. I had them on my phone, so they were easy access to sort of follow the recording. But I think
Mm,
sometimes if it was especially difficult, or I was having thoughts, say at work or somewhere in a more public place, then I would just do it myself without the recording.
yeah. Okay, cool. Um, and so just going back to, so you did ERP before seeing Johnny, and that was sort of really helpful for you. Anything you want to say on the ERP about your experience?
Yeah, I think it was a good experience for me. I really wanted to
Mm,
see improvements, not in a scientific way as such, but just to measure that I'm actually improving. And that was the first time I thought, "Oh, I can actually see that I'm improving as a result of reducing the amount of compulsions I did. I kind of had these like little A5 sort of
mm,
small cards that I'd write the obsessions down, list the compulsions, and then slowly try and start the easiest way or easiest obsession or compulsion to eliminate, and then working my way up. So yeah,
mm,
I find that massively helpful, to be honest. And I think yeah, the objective way of measuring that, or this is no longer an issue, or this is no longer coming up, then yeah, you start to see progress, and I think that really gives you more momentum into recovery.
mm. Yeah, yeah, agreed. And then you said you saw sort of like four or five therapists prior to the ERP therapist. And you said none of them really sort of hit the nail on the head and said this is OCD. What were they sort of thinking? Did they give you any kind of ideas of what was going on for you?
Yeah, I think some of them just thought it was general anxiety. I had
Mm,
stuff from changing my diet,
okay.
um, drinking more water, even to flicking a rubber band on your hand.
All right.
And
Yeah.
then some of it was just more generic CBT stuff, which still was absolutely okay. It was just, I
Mm,
think the fact that it was never targeted as
yeah.
OCD was always going to be a sort of uphill struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Um, So just going back to those sort of couple years where pre-treatment where it was really bad for you, and you mentioned like worrying about did I just hurt someone walking past them or just what was some of like the obviously looking back was a compulsion or maybe you replayed the memory or experience in your head and that's a compulsion obviously. Were there any other compulsions you were doing that you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think those are probably the two main ones that physically
Mm,
turning around, and then also, yeah, just the general rumination. I think sometimes you could almost see images of it actually happening, which made it feel
real. Yeah.
extra real. And
Yeah.
obviously, that's why I had OCD. I couldn't distinguish that they weren't real. And
Mm,
ultimately, that's always the struggle. And there's always a reason. I found that no matter how many reasons or no matter how sure I could be, I'd always find another reason. So I think I always used to tell myself, probably even within that 2 year period, that I sort of I can't solve this. And I just have to tell myself that to try and not to solve it. And
mm,
at the end of the day, it was all about seeking certainty. And even though it feels uncomfortable, sort of uncertainty is the way forward.
yeah. Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Um, I think that was probably most of the compulsions, but I suppose it also happened for driving. So I really struggled to drive.
Mm,
Same thing with what if I sort of hit someone, or what if I had hit someone, to then retracing my
mm,
sort of steps in the car, wanting to avoid to drive. Um, and especially going back to the assault thing, that was definitely exacerbated that if I was drinking, it would get worse. Um,
yeah.
Kind of in the sense that you tell yourself, well, what if I was more out of control?
Yeah.
Um, yeah, even going to a train station, what if I pushed someone in front of the train?
Mm,
And it's so funny sometimes when you get wrapped into those obsessions that at the time I remember driving somewhere and retracing my steps, and in my head I'd hit someone, and
Mm.
the reason no one had found them after 2 weeks is because I'd hit them so hard that they were hidden under bushes without any
Okay.
marks on my car. And it's only until that sort of dissipates that you realize that actually that is just so unrealistic.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Yeah, but the,
Um,
the logical part of our brain just is not, it's not offline, but it's being overpowered in that moment, right? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And I
Mm.
think reassurance was also terrible at that point.
Okay.
I think I would just phone my parents, explain to them that I was having all these thoughts, and they obviously really struggled to understand at the time, but they were extremely supportive. But
Mm.
naturally, would entertain that reassurance because they
Yeah.
wanted me to feel better. And um, yeah, obviously, it wasn't until later down the line where I realised how sort of damaging that was.
Yeah, of course. And speaking of the intrusive image there of like hitting someone into the bushes with your car, did you ever sort of like check for news reports of hit and run accidents or anything like that?
Yeah, definitely. I'd be on sort of local news stations and
Mm.
yeah, trying to seek as much certainty as I can. There was times, honestly, where I would have loved to have phoned the police to ask them, have you had any reports of X or Y? Um, Obviously, I didn't in the end, but it definitely got close to that. I think you just want to do anything to seek that reassurance,
Yeah.
uncertainty. And I probably didn't view it at the time, but every new obsession was the most important. You never thought about the next one. So I think that's why recovery was so difficult within that 2 year period, that I was only focused on sort of one at a time rather than thinking, oh no,
Mm.
I'd not really seen the patterns. And even if I solve this one, there'll be another one.
Yeah.
I think until it was just all the time. And then you realize that I can't sort of live life like this anymore. I lost enjoyment for things
Mm.
that I used to love before I sort of had OCD.
Yeah.
Um, and it was just sort of like almost a real struggle. And I think that's was the turning point of
Mm.
I really have to see recovery or I just can't sort of go on like this but for a long period of time.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And you said in 2018, you got drunk that night, and then it was kind of the next day, it felt like OCD kind of came in a big way. Was there anything pre that night out in your childhood, even teen years, early 20s, where OCD was somewhat there?
Yeah, I think slight anxiety after drinks was definitely a bit of a feature, but only after quite sort of heavy drinking evenings,
Mm.
which I assume was just normal. But I think that crept in a bit, and definitely that combination of anxiety and having obsessions definitely
Mm.
made that sort of worse. But the only other thing I can recall was when I was much younger. I was extremely worried about one of my parents sort of not coming home after they'd
Mm.
been out or away from the house. And I think for a 2 or 3 month period, I really struggled with um, constantly calling them to make sure that they were home and stuff like that. But then that just
Mm.
went away when I was sort of 7, 8 years old. And that's really the only thing I could
Mm.
think of. I lived very sort of regular life. I was very fortunate to have a really warm family and
Mm.
extremely supportive throughout um, my entire childhood. So it wasn't really anything that I could put my finger on to say,
No.
this is the reason, or I could see this coming. It was more, maybe it was this, perhaps it was that, but nothing concrete.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, fair enough. And Was there like an epiphany moment in your recovery journey where just everything kind of made sense? Like it just clicked for you?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that was definitely that first sort of therapy session I had with my therapist at the time called Nina. When she first said, "Oh, I think it's OCD," I think I already had an inkling that it was that. And
Mm,
I think from then, that as soon as I knew she had an understanding, I think I sort of trusted in the work she was doing, and that helped
mm,
massively. I think I probably almost became obsessed in that 2 year period of researching everywhere online, looking at loads of videos. So it was almost that I'd had a reasonable amount of knowledge about what it was and kind of had an inkling it was OCD as well. So that helped also massively working with my therapist to get an understanding of what she was trying to make me do and to already have learned some of those behaviors that I needed to sort of change in order to
mm.
go on that recovery journey. And then I think also a sort of second um, wave of that recovery with the work I did with Johnny. And I think since then, it's been a lot easier to sort of manage. And I haven't had the sort of ups and downs as much, the more steadier.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect. And kind of opposite to that question, which is any roadblocks? And then if so, like how did you overcome them?
I think it was probably the knowledge that was really tricky. I think of not knowing I even had OCD, and I know I said earlier that I'd see sort of 4 or 5 therapists, but at that point you kind of want to give up. But I think it's the type of thing that if you continue to strive towards wanting to recover, because I think at times you just want to give up and not really do anything. I imagine there's some similarities to some symptoms of depression where you just want to kind of lie in bed, avoid doing everything that, especially doing any exposures or anything that might trigger obsessions. But I think wanting to continue or striving to recover and just having that determination was almost the first steps of going on that sort of journey. And I would definitely say that was always a roadblock. And I do think there's a lot of stigma, perhaps online, that you can never recover. I don't mean that you're gonna get rid of having obsessive compulsive disorder, but you'll never feel better. Like you've just got this for life. You just have to
Mm.
deal with it, and it's always going to feel terrible. And I don't think that's definitely not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. Good point.
Um, yeah,
So on that then, so just words of hope for anyone listening. Like, what would you tell them?
I think having sort of those 30 to 40 sort of obsessions of different types of things, and I was definitely at a dead end, just thinking I'm never going to recover. Um, but yeah, I just think persistence pays off. Definitely having a
Mm,
therapist who understands what you're sort of going through, and if they can help you in the right way, I would definitely recommend exposure and response prevention
mm,
and acceptance. I think both of those techniques, especially together,
mm.
really help. Um, and yeah, I think through that definitely help massively. Um, yeah, for my recovery anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. And is there anything else you did in your recovery process or even now that helps you with your mental well-being?
Yeah, I think definitely during my first therapy, I took medication, and I think
Mm,
that combination for me, again, helped at the same time as doing exposure and response prevention. I
mm,
took fluoxetine, and I think it was a 20 milligram dose. So I took that for about a year and a half. Luckily, didn't have any sort of side effects.
mm.
Perhaps maybe a bit of anxiety when I first started taking it. Um, but apart from that, I didn't have any side effects, and I do think that helped massively. I think luckily, um, my first therapist, or that therapist back in 2020, she was a psychologist, so had very sort of open discussions about taking medication to help.
Nice. So you can pick up the phone and call the 20-year-old you. What do you tell him?
I think I would say, sorry, when you say, is this just 20 in general?
Yeah, so you've got a like almost sort of like a time traveling phone that you can speak to who you were at 20 years old. What did he need to know at that point?
I think you'd probably say challenges are to come. Prepare for the worst.
Brace
No,
yourself.
I think, yeah, brace yourself. But I think in a really strange way, I think you would say challenges are to come, and you need, prepare for a lot of obstacles in the way. But I think having gone through all of that, kind of it will get better after then. And I'm actually not resentful that I've had OCD. Actually quite thankful in a way. I think it definitely matured me at the time, and it's had benefits of the kind of person I am today, which I don't know if thankful is the right word, but it is almost made me who a part of I am today, and I don't regret that necessarily.
Yeah.
So yeah, and it's helped for other sort of life situations where general worry or things that you absolutely need to worry about is helps managing uncertainty in life, I guess. And I suppose I would say, yeah, whilst it's going to be extremely hard, then there'll also be things that are positive as a result.
Yeah, good point. Absolutely. And then you've got a billboard where you live. What do you want written on that billboard?
I think just live by your values, something like that.
Yeah, nice.
Um,
yeah, do what matters. Live by
exactly.
your values.
Yeah. Something along those lines. Do what you love.
Yeah.
Life short, something like that. Bit cliche, but
no, wow, it's clear. The cliche ones often have some truth to them, So,
yeah.
And then lastly, anything else you wish you could have said or shared today?
I don't think so at this stage, but yeah, I think probably just to reiterate on one of my points earlier is that I think doing it alone is so challenging that I think you need, whether that be a therapist, family member, friends, just to go on the journey with you, even if they don't understand it fully. I think them just having that supportive person is really going to help for recovery, or even a second opinion on how you might be able to get better or improve is absolutely crucial, because I think it can feel really overwhelming trying to think about the next steps on your own, especially when you can't really think of anything else but what you're going through. And it's too cumbersome.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So thank you so much for sharing your story. It's been great to hear it, Alex, and I know it'll help many. Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. And if you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.